Most people think economic survival is about luck, being at the right place at the right time, holding the right asset, or trusting the right expert. But what if the truth is completely different? What if, for nearly a century, through every crisis, 1929, the Great Depression, the oil shocks, the inflation of the 70s, the dot-com crash, the housing collapse of 2008, and even COVID-3 specific positions quietly survived every storm, while everything else burned around them? And what if almost nobody talks about them, not because they're secret, but because they challenge everything we assume about money, power, and safety? This isn't about guessing the next hot stock or predicting the next crash. This is about tracing a pattern stretching almost 100 years, a pattern hidden in plain sight. The mystery is simple. When everything collapses, what remains standing? The answer lies in how the financial world actually works beneath the surface. The incentives of governments, the psychology of crowds, and a strange sequence of events repeating far too consistently to ignore. To understand why these three positions survived while others vanished, we have to restart the clock back to the 1920s, a decade that looked unstoppable. America was booming, factories were expanding, new investors were flooding the stock market, and banks were lending money like nothing could ever go wrong. Newspapers ran stories calling it a new era where downturns were impossible. But there was one small problem: everything depended on confidence, and almost nothing depended on reality. As markets soared, a quiet imbalance began forming. People were borrowing more than they could repay. Companies were inflating valuations with almost no profit behind them. But deeper than all of that was the real cause. The entire system was built on optimism, not resilience. And when optimism cracked, the whole world cracked with it. In 1929, that crack arrived. Stocks collapsed, banks failed, millions lost savings in a single week. But while this chaos destroyed nearly everyone, three kinds of people walked out stronger. At that moment, nobody noticed them. They weren't loud, they weren't famous, and they weren't predicting doomsday. But they held positions rooted in something different, something that didn't depend on the madness of crowds. Before revealing those positions, we need to follow the timeline, because these survivors didn't appear by accident. They emerged from cause and effect choices before the crisis that shaped their outcomes after the crisis. As the Great Depression spread globally, governments struggled to respond. Some printed money, others tightened budgets, and most people simply waited for the storm to pass. But the underlying pattern was clear. Crisis destroys what is fragile and strengthens what is independent. The people who survived weren't those who bet on markets. They were those positioned in ways that didn't collapse when prices collapsed. Fast forward to the 1940s. The world transitioned from depression to war. Economies were rebuilt, governments expanded their control, and the financial world became more centralized. The Bretton Woods system tied global currencies to the US dollar, and the dollar itself was tied to gold. This created the illusion of stability. It convinced entire generations that currency was safe, that banks were reliable, and that markets were predictable. But beneath the system, new imbalances formed. Inflation pressures quietly grew. Governments borrowed more than ever before. Nations relied heavily on foreign demand for their currencies. Once again, the world was building an economic tower on a foundation far weaker than it appeared. By the 1970s, the illusion cracked, inflation exploded, interest rates soared, and the dollar's connection to gold was cut forever. Suddenly, savings lost value, wages fell behind prices, and markets became almost unrecognizable. Yet again, millions suffered. Yet again, those same three positions survived. People started noticing the pattern, but not enough of them paid attention. Jump to the 1990s and early 2000s. Technology boomed, investment speculation skyrocketed, and risk became the new normal. Then came the dot-com crash. After that, the era of cheap debt created the housing bubble. Banks took massive risks, assuming home prices could never fall, but they did. And the collapse of 2008 became one of the most devastating financial disasters since 1929. But did the pattern hold? Yes. The same positions that protected people in the 1930s protected them again in 2008. Why? Because every crisis exposes the same truth. The system is built around debt, faith, and speculation, not stability. And anything dependent on those things collapses the moment trust disappears. COVID changed everything again. Lockdowns froze economies. Supply chains broke. Money printing reached historic levels. Entire industries fell. Yet amid the panic, uncertainty, and chaos, the same three positions survived again. Some even grew stronger than before. So what are they? Why are these positions so resilient? And how do they connect to the crisis cycle we're entering right now? To answer this fully, we need to examine the structure of every major collapse. Each crisis, no matter the decade, follows the same 5-step sequence: origins, rise, breaking point, fallout, and failed fixes. The origins are always the same: optimism, cheap money, rapid growth, and the belief that this time is different. People forget the past. Governments push debt higher. Investors chase returns without understanding the risks. The rise accelerates the danger. Economic growth becomes tied to borrowing. Markets inflate beyond reality. Everyone believes the boom will last forever. Then comes the breaking point. A single trigger, sometimes small, sometimes massive, shatters confidence. In 1929, it was over-leveraged stocks. In the 70s, it was inflation. In 2008, it was mortgages. In 2020, it was a virus. The cause changes, but the effect is identical. The system buckles because it was never designed to handle fear. When the crowd panics, everything built on belief collapses instantly. Next is the fallout. Banks tighten lending, markets crash, companies default, jobs vanish. Governments scramble. People who thought they were secure realize they were exposed the entire time. Finally come the failed fixes. Authorities try quick solutions, printing money, lowering rates, offering bailouts, making temporary policies. But these usually delay the next crisis, not prevent it. So where do the three crisis-proof positions fit into all of this? They fit because each one is built on fundamentals that don't disappear when confidence disappears. They are independent of the crowd's emotions. They are immune to government mistakes, and they benefit, not suffer, when the system resets. The first position that has survived every crisis since 1929 is the holder of assets backed by real utility rather than speculation. This is not about hype, popularity, or short-term returns. It's about holding something whose value comes from necessity, not excitement. Throughout history, anything tied to essential human needs, resources, productive land, infrastructure, or critical services has remained alive even when markets died. While stocks vanished, currencies devalued, and banks collapsed, real utility assets kept their footing because they weren't built on belief. They were built on use. When the world panics, people don't seek hype, they seek essentials, and essentials survive. The second crisis-proof position is the individual or institution with strong liquidity at the exact moment everyone else loses it. Liquidity is power in a crisis. It allows you to act when others can't. It allows you to buy when prices are lowest, negotiate when others are desperate, and move when the system is frozen. The people who survived 1929, 2008, and 2020 weren't the ones with the biggest portfolios. They were the ones with the most flexibility. Liquidity is the difference between being trapped and being in control. It is almost always underestimated until the moment it becomes priceless. The third position is those aligned with long-term, low-leverage cash flow streams that remain stable even during economic shutdowns. While speculative assets collapse, income survives. History shows this over and over. The Great Depression destroyed growth stocks but strengthened stable cash flow assets. The inflation era punished savers but rewarded income streams tied to rising prices. The 2008 crash destroyed leveraged bets but didn't stop steady, essential cash flows. COVID shut down luxury sectors but not core, recurring demand income. When the world enters panic mode, cash flow is the anchor that keeps someone afloat. It doesn't depend on market cycles, it depends on human behavior, which is far more predictable. These three positions, real utility, strong liquidity, and essential cash flow, don't just randomly survive every crisis. They survive because every crisis attacks the same weaknesses: speculation, leverage, and dependency. If you remove those three vulnerabilities, you become extremely hard to break. Now let's connect this to today. The world in 2025 looks strangely similar to several past moments: 1929's overconfidence, the 1970s inflation pressure, the early 2000s tech optimism, and the pre-2008 reliance on cheap debt. Governments worldwide have record-level borrowing. Inflation hasn't fully disappeared. Interest rates remain high. Markets are heavily speculative again, especially in tech and emerging sectors. Real estate in many countries is over-levered, and most people are making the same assumptions they always make before a crisis: that growth will continue, that systems are stable, that everything will be fine. But the data suggests otherwise. Household debt ratios in major economies have reached levels only seen before major downturns. Corporate defaults are quietly rising. Government deficits are widening. The number of people living paycheck to paycheck in developed countries has hit historic highs. Meanwhile, global supply chains remain fragile, and geopolitical tensions are increasing. These are not random facts. They are repeating signals patterns that appeared before almost every major collapse of the last century. And history is very clear. When signals repeat, consequences repeat. The real question isn't whether another crisis will come, it's what will survive when it does. And history's answer has never changed. Real utility assets survive because people need them. Liquidity survives because panic creates opportunity. Cash flow survives because demand returns even when markets don't. Everything else is a gamble. So what are the takeaways? First, build positions around necessity, not excitement. Anything dependent on hype, trends, or optimism collapses the moment fear appears. Second, prioritize liquidity in a world addicted to debt. Flexibility is not a luxury, it is survival. Third, focus on long-term income sources instead of short-term price movements. Markets go down, but essential cash flow rarely disappears. The warning is simple. Every crisis feels impossible until it happens, and obvious once it ends. The people who prepare are usually mocked before the collapse, and admired after it. The people who ignore history relive it. If you found this breakdown valuable and want more deep reality-based financial storytelling, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next episode goes even deeper into the patterns shaping the global economy right now.